You start to notice it quietly, a subtle tightening around the heart when you speak of light, a hesitation to admit anger, jealousy, or grief. You tell yourself you have grown beyond those things, that you are more aware now. You breathe, you meditate, you quote wisdom that once pierced you open. Yet, somewhere deep beneath all the serenity, there is a tremor, something raw that refuses to be cleansed. You have learned the language of the soul, but you fear the silence of your own depths. You speak of shadow, but only as a concept, never as a companion. You wear peace like a crown, but inside, the mind still kneels before an unseen judge. Every emotion must now justify its existence. Every impulse must sound enlightened. You begin to chase purity instead of truth. You start to believe that, if you think high enough, the dark will not find you. But the unconscious never forgets. It waits in the quiet places of your being, patient as the forest at dusk. It watches every performance of light and smiles. It knows that behind every declaration of peace, there hides a war unspoken. That every mask of calm is painted over trembling skin. And when the light becomes too blinding, the shadow grows roots. It finds its way into the tone of your kindness, the pride in your humility, the subtle disdain for those who still stumble. You wanted transcendence, not disguise. But somewhere along the way, spirituality became a stage. You began to rehearse your awakening instead of living it. You started to fear being human, mistaking perfection for evolution. And the very thing meant to free you became another cage, wrapped in mantras and mirrors. The ego returned, this time wearing white robes and gentle words. Carl Jung warned that the greatest danger lies in believing we are already whole. For the moment we declare ourselves pure, the unconscious begins its quiet rebellion. What you reject does not disappear, it descends. It hides in dreams, in sudden irritations, in the fatigue that no rest can heal. It whispers, "Come back to me." The truth is simple, yet terrifying. You cannot become light by denying darkness. You cannot ascend by avoiding descent. Real spirituality does not polish the self, it dissolves it. It does not make you correct, it makes you honest. And honesty hurts before it heals. So breathe and look again. Beneath all your insights and prayers, what still feels unworthy of love? What emotion do you refuse to name? The answer will not come as a revelation of light, but as a shadow that finally stops hiding. And in that quiet recognition, the journey truly begins. Now a door opens, and behind it waits the one thing you have avoided in all your striving, the untamed truth of your own humanity. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when light becomes its own illusion. You begin to see how easily the hunger for meaning transforms into a hunger for superiority. You speak of consciousness, yet something in you still wants to be seen as awakened. You pray not to connect, but to prove you are already connected. It is subtle, almost invisible, and that is what makes it dangerous. The ego has not died, it has adapted. It has learned your sacred language and now hides behind your virtue. Jung understood this paradox well. He saw how the psyche uses even spirituality as defense, as a polished armor against the terror of the unknown within. When you call yourself healed, you often mean controlled. When you say I have forgiven, you may mean I have silenced the wound. The unconscious watches all this with quiet irony, because it knows the difference between integration and repression. It knows that unacknowledged shadow will not rest. It will move through you like an invisible river, coloring your thoughts and shaping your choices until you finally listen. Imagine a temple at night. The candles flicker, perfumed smoke drifts, and the air feels heavy with devotion. Yet in the corners of that temple, the darkness breathes. It is not evil, only forgotten. You sense it, but you keep your gaze fixed on the altar. The divine asks for your wholeness, but you bring only half of yourself. The polished half, the serene half, the half that will not disturb the ceremony. And so the offering remains incomplete. This is the danger of becoming spiritually correct. It is not about false teachings or dogma. It is the inner posture of censorship, the secret refusal to meet what is alive within you. You trade authenticity for acceptance, depth for appearance. The mind builds a tower of light and climbs it, believing height means freedom. But the foundation below begins to crack, and the climb becomes a balancing act over everything you fear to feel. The psyche does not care for ideals, it longs for wholeness. Wholeness is messy, contradictory, full of tension. It demands that you embrace both the saint and the sinner within. Jung's individuation is not a process of purification, but of inclusion. The self emerges when every voice in you has been heard, not when all but one have been silenced. Real spirituality does not elevate you above your humanity. It burrows you deeper into it until you discover the divine breathing there. To walk this path is to allow your shadow to sit beside you in meditation. To let anger burn without calling it unspiritual. To admit fear and still stay present. This is not regression, it is reunion. Each feeling is a forgotten child of your psyche, knocking at the door of awareness, asking to come home. And if you open that door, the temple lights grow softer but truer. The fragrance of devotion changes, no longer sweet and controlled, but earthy, alive, whole. Spiritual correctness is seductive because it promises safety. It gives you words that sound enlightened, communities that echo your light. But every mantra, repeated without heart, becomes noise. Every belief, held without questioning, becomes a prison. Jung would say that the unconscious does not evolve through imitation, but through confrontation. And confrontation always begins with what you least want to see. Look closely then. Behind your highest intentions, what still needs to be loved? Beneath your calm, what storm is waiting? The moment you can sit in that storm, without shame, the danger of spiritual correctness dissolves. And in its place, something real begins to breathe, not the performance of peace, but the living pulse of truth. There is a strange kind of fatigue that comes when you try too hard to be good. You wake each morning determined to stay balanced, to remain calm, to keep your vibration high. You monitor your thoughts as if they were prisoners under your care. You whisper affirmations, while secretly fearing that a single negative emotion could undo your progress. It is exhausting to keep your inner world immaculate, for life does not speak in perfection. It speaks in opposites, in contradictions, in the sacred tension between what you call light and dark. The more you pursue purity, the more you divide yourself. The heart splits into two chambers, one that loves and one that denies love. The denied parts do not vanish, they only change shape. They hide beneath your compassion, they echo in your advice to others. You say everything happens for a reason, yet you cannot sit in your own sorrow. You say you trust the universe, yet you still tremble when control slips away. You have learned to use spiritual language as armor, turning wisdom into walls. Jung would say that the shadow grows stronger the more it is excluded from the conversation. Every time you reject a thought or feeling as unworthy, it falls deeper into the unconscious, gaining weight. It becomes the unseen architect of your behavior, designing moments that mirror what you refuse to face. The friend who annoys you, the partner who triggers you, the stranger who unsettles you, each becomes a messenger. They carry the pieces you abandoned. Imagine a river, dammed by your own ideals. The water piles against the barrier, silent at first, then restless, then roaring. The more you hold it back, the more pressure builds, until one day it breaks. The flood is not punishment, it is correction. The psyche seeks balance, not obedience. It does not want you perfect, it wants you whole. The flood cleanses what you tried to hide, revealing that the mud itself is sacred, for without it, no lotus could bloom. To become spiritually correct is to forget that evolution requires friction. Growth happens when opposites meet and rub against each other, not when they stay politely apart. The moment you stop labeling emotions as high or low, you begin to live again. The moment you let your humanity breathe, the spirit returns to it. This is where transformation begins, not in denial, but in the gentle acceptance of every imperfect truth that lives inside you. There is a quiet pride that creeps into the soul once you start to feel awakened. You begin to see through illusions, to sense energies, to read patterns in others. And soon, without noticing, you stand above them. You speak softly, as if from a mountain of awareness, while those below still wrestle in the mud of their emotions. It feels gentle, but it is separation disguised as insight. The light, when it believes itself superior, becomes another shadow. Jung warned that the spiritual persona is one of the subtlest masks the ego can wear. It does not boast of possessions or power, it boasts of clarity. It uses humility as a crown. It speaks of surrender, while secretly grasping for control over the mystery. When you believe you have reached a higher level, you have already lost the path, for the self is not found by ascent, but by descent, by returning to what you tried to transcend. The unconscious waits at the base of the mountain, not its peak. Picture a mirror covered in dust. You wipe it again and again, but each stroke leaves new streaks. Finally, you grow tired and stop. And in that stillness, the dust settles by itself, revealing the reflection you sought all along. The same happens in your inner life. Every attempt to purify yourself becomes another movement of the ego, trying to perfect its image. The more you polish, the less you see. Only when you stop trying to be holy do you begin to glimpse what is truly sacred. The temptation of spiritual correctness is that it replaces genuine inquiry with performance. You start to ask not what is true, but what sounds true. You begin to shape your words to fit the image of enlightenment. And slowly, truth becomes theater. The audience applauds your serenity, while your shadow performs the roles you refuse to play. But when the applause fades, you find yourself alone, unsure of who you are without the script. Real spirituality does not need witnesses. It does not need to be admired or validated. It happens in the unseen, in the moments when you admit your own confusion and sit quietly inside it. Jung believed that individuation begins the moment you stop pretending. When you allow the contradictions within you to exist, without forcing harmony, something larger than personality begins to take form. It is not perfection, but presence. Not serenity, but wholeness. The true danger of becoming spiritually correct is that it numbs the very pulse of awakening. You cannot feel deeply while defending an image of peace. You cannot meet God while hiding from yourself. The path opens only when you kneel in the dust, when the mask cracks, and you dare to love what you find beneath it. Then, and only then, light stops being an escape and becomes a homecoming. At some point, you realize the journey is not about ascending but descending. Not about reaching the heavens, but about remembering the earth. You find that your deepest insights arise, not in meditation halls, but in moments of raw imperfection, in arguments, in tears, in laughter that shakes something free inside you. The soul does not awaken in abstraction. It awakens in the friction of living. Jung called it the tension of opposites, the meeting point, where light and darkness exchange their secrets. When you strive too hard to remain in the light, you create a division the psyche cannot sustain. The neglected shadow begins to speak through your body, through anxiety, exhaustion, illness. The more spiritual you become, the more human you are forced to feel. The universe, in its strange mercy, will not let you escape your wholeness. It brings you back through breakdowns, through mistakes that humble your ideals, through love that disarms your concepts of love. Think of fire. It illuminates, but it also burns. To know its warmth, you must risk its flame. In the same way, to know the divine within you, you must allow yourself to be consumed by it, not purified into something higher, but transformed into something truer. The process of individuation is not a climb toward purity, but a surrender into authenticity. What the spiritual ego calls failure, the self calls initiation. There is a reason the alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold. The lead is not to be thrown away. It is the beginning of the work, the matter that contains the treasure. Spiritual correctness wants to skip the lead and move straight to the gold, to bypass the chaos, to jump to the halo. But without lead, there is no transformation. Without darkness, there is no depth. Without descent, no real ascent. The gold of consciousness is born only when you have touched the lowest parts of your own being and embraced them with compassion. And so the soul moves in cycles, not straight lines. It contracts before it expands. It descends before it rises. The ego hates this rhythm because it cannot control it. It wants light without shadow, joy without sorrow, order without mystery. Yet, the psyche dances to a different tempo, one woven by the eternal rhythm of creation itself. When you stop resisting that dance, the masks fall away. You no longer seek to be spiritual. You simply become alive. In that aliveness, you begin to see what spirituality truly means. Not the elimination of the human, but its consecration. Every emotion, every failure, every desire becomes part of the sacred tapestry of being. And as you surrender to that truth, the danger of becoming spiritually correct begins to dissolve, replaced by something infinitely humbler and far more divine. There is a moment in every seeker's life when silence stops being peaceful. It becomes heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very stillness you cultivated begins to demand something from you. You try to meditate it away, to breathe it back into calmness, but the silence will not obey. It starts to echo with the voices you buried, the impulses you labeled unworthy. This is the threshold where many turn back, confusing awakening with comfort. But Jung knew that true awakening begins where comfort ends. You start to see that the self you built through spiritual ideals is only another mask. It smiles, it quotes, it forgives, but it does not feel. It repeats the language of light without the pulse of life beneath it. The more you identify with this spiritual persona, the more you drift from your own depths. You begin to live in the reflection of authenticity instead of its source. And when you finally tire of your own performance, a quiet rebellion begins inside. The unconscious calls you back, whispering through the cracks of your serenity. Imagine walking through a forest at dusk. The air is thick, the light dim. Every shape seems uncertain. At first you fear the dark, then you realize it is the same forest, only seen differently. The trees have not changed, your eyes have. The shadow is not an enemy. It is the side of reality you refuse to see. This is what Jung meant when he said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The danger of spiritual correctness is that it replaces this descent with imitation. It teaches you to talk about surrender instead of living it, to display awareness instead of embodying it. You start curating your emotions as if enlightenment were a gallery and you its curator. But the soul is not interested in exhibitions. It wants intimacy. It wants the raw encounter with what you are when no one is watching. To embrace that encounter is to realize that God hides in the same places you fear to look. In shame, in longing, in failure, in the moments you lose control. Every part of you that feels unspiritual is a doorway. The divine does not live at the top of the mountain. It lives in the valley, in the mud, in the ache of your becoming. The moment you stop running from that truth, grace begins its quiet work. Not as light descending from above, but as warmth rising from within. And so you soften. The need to appear spiritual fades. The urge to be right dissolves. What remains is presence, naked and human, trembling yet free. This is where the real transformation begins, not in the perfection of virtue, but in the acceptance of your imperfections as sacred ground. There comes a time when you realize that the greatest illusion was not the world outside you, but the image of who you believed you had to be. The seeker, the healer, the light worker, the evolved one. Each identity, though noble in appearance, becomes another mask. You start to sense how even goodness can become a defense. You speak softly, so you will not disturb your own image of peace. You forgive too quickly, so you will not feel the rawness of pain. You smile to hide the fatigue of pretending. The soul begins to ache, not from darkness, but from the weight of light misunderstood. Jung would remind you that the psyche seeks not perfection, but balance. When you suppress your instincts in the name of holiness, they do not die. They retreat into the underworld of your being, where they grow stronger and stranger. There they wait, not to punish you, but to restore you. Every unexpressed feeling, every forbidden desire, every denied emotion becomes a seed of renewal. The unconscious will not let you forget yourself. It will create chaos, heartbreak, confusion, anything to wake you from the hypnosis of spiritual pride. Picture a mirror cracking slowly. Each fracture catches a sliver of light. You panic, believing the mirror is ruined. But only when it breaks do you see the many reflections of what you are. The soul does not want one perfect image. It wants to be seen from every angle. What you call brokenness is only multiplicity revealed. And in this realization, something tender is born. Compassion, not as performance, but as truth. This is why the path of individuation is not ascetic. It does not demand that you renounce your humanity, but that you reclaim it. To be fully human is to allow the divine to breathe through imperfection. When you love without trying to be pure, when you fail and still remain kind to yourself, when you allow tears without judgment, you touch the mystery more deeply than through any mantra. The Spirit does not descend into saints, it descends into the honest. The danger of becoming spiritually correct is that it hardens you in the shape of virtue. It makes you careful when life wants you wild. It makes you silent when truth wants your voice. It makes you distant when love wants your presence. But when you finally surrender the need to be right, a softer wisdom emerges. It has no doctrine, no certainty, no performance. It simply moves through you, like wind through open branches, whispering that the sacred was never somewhere else. It was always here, waiting for you to stop pretending. Eventually, there is nothing left to prove. The mind grows weary of its own enlightenment. The heart grows tired of its own perfection. You begin to sense that all your striving, all your learning, all your beautiful words were only a bridge, not the destination. Beyond that bridge lies something vast and wordless. It does not care how spiritual you sound, how peaceful you appear, how much you know about consciousness. It only asks that you be real. In that naked honesty, the illusions start to fall away. The voice that once told you to rise above it all now invites you to fall into it. You see that your fear, your anger, your grief were never obstacles but gateways. They were the places where the soul had been calling from behind the curtain of your ideals. Jung called this the confrontation with the unconscious, and he knew it as the most sacred task a human can endure. It is the moment when you stop trying to save yourself and begin to listen. Imagine standing before a mirror that reflects, not your face, but your depths. You see the child you once were, the lover you betrayed, the parts of you that never found words. You meet them without judgment, without hurry. The light is dim, the air still. There is no separation anymore between divine and human, between holy and flawed. Everything belongs, and in that belonging, something ancient exhales through you. This is what real spirituality feels like. Not ecstasy, but integration. Not perfection, but participation in the mystery of existence. It humbles you, softens you, teaches you reverence for the complexity of being alive. The more you allow yourself to feel everything, the closer you come to the essence of the self, that silent center Jung spoke of, where opposites reconcile and consciousness becomes whole. And when you reach that stillness, you realize there was never any danger, except the one created by the mind's fear of imperfection. The soul never needed you to be correct. It needed you to be complete. Every wound, every contradiction, every forgotten dream has led you here. You look at your reflection one last time and see not a sage, not a saint, not a seeker, but a human being, finally unafraid to be both light and shadow. And that, quietly, is freedom. You begin to sense the rhythm of it all, the pulse beneath appearances. The need to be right begins to fade, and with it, the walls you built around your light. You feel how much energy you have spent trying to maintain the image of clarity, trying to keep the temple of your mind pure. And now the temple feels empty, not in despair, but in relief. The silence that once frightened you has become your companion. The stillness that once felt like death now breathes like life. Every fragment you rejected returns, one by one, not as enemies but as pilgrims. Anger arrives in bows. Fear steps forward, trembling but willing. Desire kneels beside them. You begin to see them as sacred emissaries, each carrying a part of the divine you once exiled. This is the alchemy Jung spoke of, the merging of opposites within the crucible of awareness. The shadow and the light finally recognize one another, not as rivals, but as reflections in the same mirror. The soul expands in that recognition. You feel the tenderness of imperfection, the beauty of paradox. You no longer divide your being into spiritual and human, holy and profane. Everything becomes an expression of the same mystery, unfolding through the rhythm of your breath. You realize that the self does not demand purity, only presence. It does not ask you to ascend, only to awaken where you stand. The forest, the mirror, the river, all these symbols you carried begin to dissolve, leaving only life itself. And with that dissolution comes peace. Not the peace you tried to manufacture, but the peace that arises when resistance ends. The unconscious no longer hides, for it is finally welcomed. The ego no longer fights, for it has found its right place in the dance of the whole. You become transparent to yourself, and through that transparency, the world shines differently. Every face, every sound, every silence feels like home. You have not become enlightened, you have become real. This is the quiet victory of the journey. The danger of being spiritually correct is replaced by the freedom of being fully alive. You stand where you have always stood, yet everything feels new. The night no longer opposes the dawn, it prepares it. The shadow no longer frightens the light, it completes it. You bow inwardly to all that has shaped you, the fear, the faith, the confusion, the grace, and feel the sacred pulse of unity move through you like a soft wind across still water. You sit quietly now, feeling the weight and lightness of everything that has been seen. The journey no longer feels like a climb, but a slow unfolding. You realize there was never a finish line, only moments of deeper honesty. Each truth arrived like a wave, and each wave left you cleaner, softer, more whole. The masks have fallen, the striving has stopped, and what remains is the simple awareness of being. Not the seeker, not the saint, not the student of light, but the one who breathes behind them all. The mind still moves, but gently now, like wind through an open field. Thoughts no longer command, they pass. Emotions rise and fall like tides, but you no longer fear their pull. You can sit with sorrow and not drown. You can touch anger and not burn. You can hold joy without clinging. Everything becomes part of one vast movement, the soul breathing in and out, through the fabric of existence. You see now that spirituality was never about escape, but about embodiment, about finding divinity inside the very matter you once tried to transcend. You remember the forest, the mirror, the river. They were never symbols to master, but languages of the soul, guiding you home. The forest taught you to trust darkness. The mirror taught you to see without judgment. The river taught you to let go. And now they all merge into one truth, that the divine was never above you, but within you, waiting for the courage to be met. The sacred is not elsewhere, it is this very breath, this very silence, this very human heart, learning to love without condition. You close your eyes and feel the subtle hum of existence moving through you. The shadow is still there, but it no longer threatens. It has become your ally, your teacher, your mirror. The light is softer now, not blinding, but embracing. In this union, there is no longer the danger of being spiritually correct, for there is no performance left to maintain. There is only awareness, vast and still, holding both the dark and the dawn. And as you rest in that awareness, something ancient whispers inside you. It tells you that you were never meant to be pure, only whole. That love was never about perfection, but inclusion. That awakening was never about rising above life, but falling in love with it completely. You exhale quietly and let that truth settle. The river moves again. The forest breathes. The mirror shines. And somewhere deep within, the self smiles, content at last to be seen.